you've got Bitcoin, you've got borderless money, you've got the original borderless communications medium, which was the internet. If you remember like 20 years ago, right, when Facebook and all these sort of social networks first came out, we have real world social networks. And these original digital social networks were kind of like mirrors of that real world social network. They put a recommendation algorithm into that. The metric that they measure is not how much connections you have, but how much time is spent on the device. And now there's a vacuum for social networks. I want to actually build community. What Atlantis sort of becomes is almost like a Spotify for communities, places, and events. I want it to become a social network that is about discovering things to do in the real world. And yeah, that's effectively what we're trying to do for this borderless movement.
One thing that I know that you're doing a little bit different is by building on Nostr, which is a decentralized protocol, so different than like the traditional platforms. So how does that change?
I wonder if...
Aleks, welcome back to the show. I think we've done 3 or 4 shows. Always excited to have you here. I love the book you got there in the background, the Uncommunist Manifesto, of course, the book that we co-authored together. If you guys haven't read that book, you certainly should. But Aleks, we both obviously have a lot in common in regards to Bitcoin and the books that we've written. And I talk mostly about Bitcoin from like an investing lens, a macroeconomic lens, and trying to understand sort of the dangers in the market so we can get ahead, right? We're all trying to improve our lives, and most of us think money is a way to do that. But in your latest book, The Bushido of Bitcoin, you talk about how maybe just getting that money, maybe Bitcoin alone isn't enough. It's not enough, and we need capital and character. How do you see Bitcoin, maybe projects that you're working on now like Atlantis, how do you see them restoring the balance of capital and character?
First of all, good to be back, buddy. It's been a couple of months since we caught up, so I'm glad to be here. Let me answer this question this way. I'm of the opinion that, well, at least when I wrote the book a couple of years ago, I think the world was in a really challenging space, right? It seemed like woke virus was going to take over, that the world was coming to an end, that up was down, down was up, black was white, everything was sort of inverted. And it was an interesting period. I feel like we've turned the corner, particularly over the last 18 months. And I think that's continued to accelerate. I think the world is moving in a better trajectory. And I think it's got not something to do with my book, like as if my book changed this trajectory, but I think what I touched on in the book was this sort of desire, to move back towards a age in which we kind of value character once again, like character, principles, virtues, and things like that. And there's been in my opinion, at least, a marked improvement. Like you look at the discourse, even on things like, you and I went back and forth on this on X the other day. It's like a lot of social media and all this sort of stuff is just becoming slop. Mm-hmm. But beneath the slop, there's actually, the quality of the discourse is much better. The kind of stuff that is getting traction and the kind of stuff we're talking about is far more honest, far more real, and what I would say like right coded, right? So for me, the premise or the idea behind the book of like uniting capital and character is kind of stems from this idea that if you optimize just for one, and which is capital, and I think a big problem in the world over the last probably 100 years is that we've optimized more and more and more just for capital, and we've kind of forgot the character side of things. What you end up doing is you kind of turn civilization into a giant strip mall. It's just... everything is just designed not for meaning anymore. You don't get these beautiful cathedrals. You get these shopping mall squares where everything looks the same, sounds the same. And it's, just about extracting something from you instead of, building something beautiful that actually gives back to the environment around it. So in my opinion, and this is the sort of the core message of the book, is that in order to build a better world, we can't just win the economic game. I think this was my big insight out of the book, is like the economic part is really, really important. And you and I wrote about it in the Uncommunist Manifesto. That's like the foundation, but it needs to form the basis of something higher, something more ascendant. And that, I think, is sort of the pursuit of beauty, of character, of virtue, of excellence, which are things that are often not economic in nature. Like going and building a cathedral over 300 years, which you're not going to see the return on investment on and all that sort of stuff, has nothing to do with Austrian economics and sound money. It's got everything to do with in fact, sacrificing economics for something higher. And I think that's it's an important distinction. And my hope as a message for the book is that people start to realize that, hey, okay, we need to win the capital game. Yes, we need a strong foundation. You can't build a house on a weak foundation, but then you need the character and the virtue around that. So that's sort of the message there.
Do you think they're like a chicken or the egg? Are they complementary, or is it more of like a hierarchy of needs where once I've been able to secure my capital and I've built myself or secured my future with the capital, then I can focus on things of beauty and building character? Or is it where if I surround myself with beauty and character first, then I can get the capital and secure my future better, faster, easier?
I think it's more like a yin yang actually, where they're related, because it's we can probably find evidence of both, right? Like you can find people who might not be surrounded by beauty, but somehow they have the courage or the ingredients to make something beautiful. And I would argue that that's sort of the story of humanity, coming out of nothing, coming out of poverty, coming out of, lack, and actually building something. So I do think though there's probably a spectrum there, because the periods in which the greatest quote unquote sort of beauty and character were developed came from times when there was quite a bit of a strong sound capital base underneath it, so you actually can reach higher. I don't think it's the way I'll put it is, I don't think it's 100% necessary, because you can do it without capital, but I think it's definitely a help, and it's definitely an accelerant.
Well, I think about, if I'm broke and I'm just trying to figure out how to feed my family, I don't have time to build beauty.
Totally.
So I have to kind of take care of that need. But I also, last summer, I took my family to Italy and we went to Florence, which was absolutely beautiful. And, in that Renaissance age, it was the wealthy people who kind of funded all of that stuff. So it was probably, the people that were making the David statue and those beautiful buildings weren't the wealthy, but they had wealthy benefactors that gave them that money. But I also think, something I talk about quite often is that there's 3 types of capital. And so most of us just think about financial capital, and that's where most people spend most of their life pursuing financial capital. But I kind of think of it where financial capital isn't something that we chase. It's actually a byproduct. And it's a byproduct of our relationship capital and our mental or our skill capital. So maybe the character is part of like building the relationship. If I have good character, then those relationships are nurtured and protected and grown. And if I nurture my own mental skill capital, that's also part of the character, right? So then I have the mental capital, the skills, and I have the people, the connections, the relationships, and those combined then bring the financial capital together.
Totally. I think I wonder if how well, I'm thinking out aloud here, I'm chucking a Peter Thiel. I wonder how related. So it seems like maybe there is a fourth dimension there, and sorry to ruin your model here, but maybe the character capital is a fourth dimension. That is like how much integrity or virtue or honor and all that sort of stuff that you have as a human being then leads to the establishment of better relationships. So therefore you have stronger relationship capital, leads to the greater development of skill capital, etc., because you have the virtue of excellence, honor, and all that sort of stuff that is necessary to develop the skills, and then ultimately that leads to material capital. So I feel like they're all interrelated. Maybe there's a nuance there, or maybe you could place it as a subset to these things, but there's just something there about because there's people with lots of relationships, there's people with with lots of skills, but that they don't have that. I don't know. They don't have the character. I think it maybe lives in its own dimension.
Okay. All right. Then in a world like we have today, where we have unlimited money basically being printed with no true cost of capital, it starts to change the way that we think about money, use money, invest our money. Obviously, there's a lot of malinvestment going on without a true cost there. So how do you think it would, I guess, this character then influence our investment decisions in a macro environment that's flooded with all this cheap capital?
It's really hard, man. I mean, so strong character would look at an opportunity to make a quick, easy buck, but realize that it was a net detriment to society, and would then say, no, I'm not going to do that. Right? It's almost like the kind of like the emergence of the Bitcoin VCs, right? They were like, okay, well, we know that we can probably actually make more money by aping into a shitcoin ICO, but we chose not to because we want to actually build something interesting for the future. So I think that's got something to do with time preference, certainly, but I think it's also got something to do with character, which is sort of saying like, look, yeah, you know what? I could probably make money sex trafficking. I could probably make money doing XYZ, but it's not about the money. It's about like what kind of a world am I creating? What am I producing? And I think that's really important. And those lines have gotten blurred, and particularly over the last 50 years, as we know, like, and I would even say very much so over the last 10, 15 years, where even on like, man, you know, that stupid app that went viral the other week, the T app, right? Where, you know, chicks are sort of dobbing on other dudes and all this sort of stuff. Like, these are the apps that are like taking off. Which, are they making society better? No, they're actually making everything worse.
Right.
They're contributing to poor relationships, to, you know, really bad dynamic between men and women, to fucked up birth rate, to all this sort of stuff. Like, so yeah, sure, a bunch of VCs made some money, but did that do anything positive? Absolutely not.
Right.
So I think these things are forgotten often when you have all this cheap capital, and it doesn't matter. Like, the thing becomes, let's just, how can we double up on our money very quickly?
Yeah. You know, speaking of that, like kind of the short game versus the long game, I was telling you before we started recording about the next 5 years of my life building out this company called Satsuma. And, you know, I used to, when I first got into Bitcoin, and then I started writing a cryptocurrency newsletter, and I started talking about all the cryptocurrencies, and I was like, it's not Bitcoin, it's blockchain. And I kind of went down that rabbit hole. And about 2019, after publishing 1,000 pages of research, I decided, no, I'm just going to focus my career on Bitcoin. And at the time, crypto was still taking off, and like I could have made a lot of money by launching my own ICO and my own coin. As a matter of fact, my old business partner that I was with at the time, he did launch a token, and he did make, you know, 8 figures pretty quickly. And sometimes I was like, man, I could have just stayed with him and I would have made that money, right? But I decided to build my life and my future and my brand reputation on what I considered, what I thought would be a bigger foundation, a bigger bedrock. And now I was just telling you that I now have launched this company, Satsuma, which is that company. And I probably never would have gotten here if I had taken the short road and gone for the quick buck in the ICO, which I could have done. I could have just stayed with him and done that. And so we've gotten something bigger here. A lot of it comes down to incentives, though. And I guess I was in a place that allowed me to take the bigger swing and play the longer game. You're now launching your bigger swing. You have that company, Atlantis. So how do you think Atlantis can serve as a model for how companies could combine, I guess, strong financial incentives and like strong character principles together? Are you trying to combine those two?
Every day we see headlines about inflation and debt and diminishing control over our own money. That's why I always come back to Bitcoin, because it's built for generations. It's built for legacy. But protecting your Bitcoin legacy the right way, it's not always simple. It demands discipline, focus, and the right partner. Now that's why I personally use Unchained Signature. It's a premium private client service for serious Bitcoin holders who want expert guidance, resilient custody, and an enduring partnership. Now with Signature, you're paired with your own dedicated account manager, someone who understands your goals, helps you every step of the way. You're going to get white glove onboarding, same-day emergency support, personalized education, reduced trading fees, and priority access to exclusive events and features. Unchained's collaborative custody model is designed to provide the same security as the world's biggest Bitcoin custodians, but for those who prefer to hold their own keys. Now, I've been using and recommending Unchained for years. I even got my parents to set up with them. So if you want to get set up, check out Unchained Signature at unchained.com/markmoss. And as a loyal listener, I got a discount for you. Just use code MOSS10 at checkout to get 10% off your first year, because your Bitcoin isn't just for life, it's for generations.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think the approach is novel, right? So you look at all the great companies throughout history looked at what was happening in the world at the time. They looked at what tools or technologies were available, and then they created something or produced something that was right for the time, right for people, that solved the problem. And ideally, the biggest ones, they basically carved out or created a new category of product, right? Or a new category of service, or they defined something new, right? Like Apple Computer defined or created the personal computer category, right? You know, Amazon created e-commerce, like they carved out and they became the category king. You know, the Henry Fords of the world, you know, carved out the car and all this sort of stuff. So it's not, I don't think what we're doing is philosophically different to any of that. I think that is going to be the case forever, right? What I'm doing is I'm, you know, personally, like in the context of Atlantis, I see this kind of move towards a world. I use the word borderless. I'm trying to like come up with a framing for the kind of the sovereignty movement, and I'm hesitant to use the word sovereignty. I know sort of us in the Bitcoin space and all this sort of stuff, we use it a lot, but we did some testing to sort of understand how people perceive the word sovereignty outside of the Bitcoin space, and everyone thinks it's got something to do with you know, white supremacist groups or something like that, which is really fun.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've been thinking more about the idea of borderless living, and you know, you've got some ingredients now for that. You've got Bitcoin, you've got borderless money, right? You've got the original borderless communications medium, which was the internet. Now, you know, there's things being built upon the internet that will hopefully reinstate some of that borderlessness, because as we know, the internet has kind of been siloed out into these like whether it's the social media silos, but also like there's a lot of this like cookies and KYC and all this other kind of crap that has sort of like bogged the internet down a little bit, where you know, you can't log into a freaking website anymore without, you know, having to prove you're human.
Oh, it's
you know,
terrible.
It drives me crazy.
It's terrible.
It drives me nuts. So so I think there's these tools that are kind of like hopefully creating a section of the internet that'll once again be a little bit more borderless, a little bit more mobile. But it actually extends beyond that. You know, there's this movement towards network states and free private cities. There's obviously this whole movement to, you know, you see the passport bros and the geo arbitrage people trying to do like flag theory, multiple passports, have some level of location independence. And it all comes from the same thread, right? Even down to people that are like doing seed oil free and touching grass and, you know, using blue light blockers and saunas and all this sort of shit. They're trying to get outside of the mainstream bubble and do something that's sort of outside, and that gives them more, I guess, sovereignty, choice, flexibility, something, you know, unique for them. So I see this movement happening, right? And the other accelerant in this movement is with the rise of AI and with the strip mallification of social media, right, where everything is just sort of becoming slop and you're just being sold crap and all this sort of stuff, and it's just kind of like proliferation of just crap online.
Yep.
There's this craving from people to be not only more borderless and location independent, but also to start like connecting, building community, curating like real life experiences. So if I take that movement, if I take this large trend that's happening, and then I think, all right, what can we do? What is the product that is kind of like lacking in the world today? I see kind of this 3 pillars to it, like people, connecting people with places, and with events, like real world events. I think the more online gets like full of noise, people are actually going to want, and whether that's like a run club, whether that is just like a mastermind, whether that is a small event, a large event, a conference, a retreat, whatever, this stuff I think is going to increase. And what Atlantis sort of becomes is almost like a Spotify for communities, places, and events. It's a place where you can discover all of this stuff, and you can do so through the lens of your social graph and your interests, right? So something like this doesn't necessarily exist. And for me, it's how can I build or carve out a new category of product that's almost like part map, part events app, part social app, which is, in the past, I was kind of framing it a little bit more like Instagram, but now, this sort of, I've had a big awakening after Prague, and I'm sort of almost seeing it as a Spotify. Like Spotify, you're creating lists and playlists and you're sharing it with people, and it kind of delivers something for your taste. Could you have a Spotify for communities, for places, and for events? And I think that's a really compelling sort of angle. And yeah, that's effective what we're trying to do for this borderless movement, for this movement of increasing sovereignty, choice, and living outside of the mainstream matrix.
That word that you used, taste, right? That's the one thing AI doesn't have. You're a writer. Obviously, we co-art the book together. You're a much better writer than I am, but you can see and I've tried to use AI quite a bit for this, and it's really good at a lot of things, and I use it a lot. But it cannot write. There's no soul. It's just like a bunch of words that don't really mean anything, and you can just see there's no taste. And so then you mentioned the slop, online slop. I think that's kind of what you're saying, where it's like you can see people are using it just to write stuff, and there's nothing there. There's no substance, and not only in the content, but in the posts and the replies that come on top of that. But I think a lot of that comes back down to the incentives, right? So like one of the things I think, obviously AI being that tool that allows people to throw the slop out pretty quickly. But then with X or Twitter, or now X, sort of incentivizing or monetizing accounts. So now if I get a lot of views on my post, then I get money. And then, we find the formula that works. So there's a pattern interrupt, and I have to throw something out controversial, and then I have to give the context, and then I have to give the teaching point, and I have to give the summary, and then everything looks the same. And as soon as I see it, I'm like, okay, that's going to not have any value. I'll just roll on by. But I think it was a combination of the tools and the incentives that sort of have caused that to sort of happen. So I'm just curious, that seems to be where we're at in the digital age. So how does something like Atlantis fix that? How do we kind of avoid that mediocrity, the clickbait, the outrage, which is also, the outrage is also part of the human emotion, right? Because we're much more attuned to fear than we are for pleasure. So how does that change?
So let me take a step back then. Let's do a little bit of a history lesson on what happened and how we got here. So if you remember like 20 years ago, right, when Facebook and all these sort of social networks first came out, right? They were somewhat of a replication of what we did in real life. Like you and I are friends, we're connected, we have a direct social connection, and then I am connected to your friends through you. So there's a degree of separation there, and we have real world social networks. And these original digital social networks were kind of like mirrors of that real world social network. And originally, if you remember, like there was no algorithms. It was just you're seeing what your friends are sharing, and they're sharing stuff like that, and you had this kind of network established online. About 10 years ago, the Google DeepMind team actually set out to, after they bought YouTube, they wanted to increase the time spent watching videos after a particular video. So what they did was they built the world's first recommendation algorithm, and they nailed it. I think it was, I don't know the statistic exactly, but it was something like 3,000% increase in view time, right? After this. So then some companies obviously quickly followed that up. So it was ByteDance at the time, I think, was one of the first early movers. They were in China at the time. This was before they had released Douyin in America, which became TikTok. They had, I can't remember, it was their news thing. So they put a recommendation algorithm into that. Then Facebook copied. And we had what became the era of social networks turning into social media. And social media is different. Social media is more about algorithms and recommendation engines, and about the metric that they measure is not how much connections you have, but how much time is spent on the device. So the leading metric is engagement. Now, if you kind of mix this together, this ties into what you said about incentives. If your metric is engagement, then what engages? As you said, people are more prone to notice fear. So it's like, it's that classic, if it bleeds, it leads, right? So media is always designed or optimized to kind of capture your limbic brain and like stress it and get you sucked into something. So if the metric is engagement, what ends up happening is these things naturally turn into kind of slop fests because that is the thing that sucks people in. Now, what's happened is we've left a massive gap. Like everything has become social media. Like everything is basically looking the same. You look on Instagram, you look on Twitter, you look on Snapchat, you look on TikTok. It's all the same shit. Everything is a formula. Everything is a piece of media. Everything is designed for the algorithm, not for the content, all this sort of stuff. And it's not going to get better. In my opinion, that's going to keep trending that way because AI is going to accelerate this. But it's left a massive gap for social network, which is I want to know who I'm connected to. I want to actually build community. I don't want to just have a fucking an empty following of 1 million people who I don't know. I actually want to have some level of connection. And then I want to use that network for stuff in the real world. I want to know where to go, what to do, the places to check out. I want that to inform my actual real life, not to make me spend more time on the app, right? So this is sort of the needle I'm trying to thread now is Atlantis. I don't want it to become a social media app that is about content. I want it to become a social network that is about discovering things to do in the real world and connecting with people. So you can build communities, so that you can curate places, so that you can run events and attend events and discover them and all this sort of stuff. So I want it to get you into the real world as opposed to keeping you on your phone. So the metric for success for us will be different. And I'm hoping that will keep it from becoming a fucking engagement farm.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I know that you're doing a little bit different is by building on Nostr, which is a decentralized protocol. So different than like the traditional platforms that we have that are built in these centralized models. But how do you think in a decentralized model that changes that? I mean, do you think that in this decentralized model, it will keep that from happening?
Not necessarily. I don't think Nostr sort of keeps that from
Or
happening.
does it drive fair quality over time if it stays decentralized?
Not necessarily. I think there's a lot of misconception around what Nostr is, and I think since Nostr doesn't have a marketing department, it's never been articulated very well. In my opinion, Nostr provides one piece of value, or actually no, I should rephrase that. Nostr has many different values, but I think the primary piece of value is that you own the relationships between you and the other accounts. So let's think about Instagram for a second. You go and build 1 million followers on Instagram, but for whatever reason, you either get banned or the algorithm changes, or what's happened with Facebook recently. Like imagine you've gone and built all this like sort of audiences on Facebook and everything, and nobody uses Facebook anymore. How much value is there left in the networks and the community you built there?
Not much.
Zero, nothing. Like it's yeah, exactly. Like people are increasing. Like they're like, man, I've got an 80,000 person group on Facebook, and I get 3 likes on my announcement there. It's like, okay, congratulations. You just put 20 years of work into this thing and it's worthless. If you could somehow, and let's do a hypothetical here, and then I'll explain how it'll work. If Facebook and Instagram and all this sort of stuff were supposedly built on a protocol where the identity was interoperable, not the apps. The apps can all be different and can do different things. There can be long form apps, there can be video apps, there can be community apps, there can be whatever, right? But if somehow the identity protocol was common, you could just log out of Facebook and you could log into Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and the relationships will be there. Not necessarily the content. And this is where a lot of people miscommunicate what Nostr is. They're like, oh, you can keep your content is uncensorable. No, that is not the point of Nostr. Who cares about the content? It's not about that. It's the relationships that are important, because then you can take your relationships and you can go to the new app, which the new app might be really cool. It might be for scrolling videos or whatever. It might be for finding places. It might be for whatever, but those relationships are there. And that's where the value is. It's almost like you would understand this as a marketer. It's like owning your email list, right? You can go and build an email list on Kit, on SendGrid, on this app, on ClickFunnels, and all these different places. But ultimately, you kind of aggregate that into one list. The list is where the value is. So that's kind of like what Nostr is. It's the ownership of email with the distribution potential of social. So that is for me why I chose to use it. Now, I didn't choose it because, Nostr is supposedly going to be the thing that changes the internet. It is just the best implementation of the original intent of the internet. From the beginning, the internet was supposed to have an identity layer, but it just never did. So like what ended up happening is identity became a feature inside applications. So you have an identity with LinkedIn, you have an identity with Uber, you have an identity with Amazon, you have an identity with Facebook, blah, blah, blah. It was just a feature inside all of these apps. Nostr, or if it's not Nostr that wins, maybe something else will win. But Nostr is a great implementation for pushing the identity back down to the protocol and then allowing application developers like us to build something really cool, but to build it in such a way that uses the social graph underneath to enhance the experience. So that's what's cool about what we're doing.
What about the security side of it? So you mentioned earlier how when you log into all these websites, you have to like put in this KYC and 2FA and everything. It's so annoying. I hate that you have to do that. I understand we have to do it because of the security aspect of it, right? I mean, these networks and these databases are getting hacked every day. We find out like another hack, it seems like. So unfortunately, with AI and the hackers, we have to have that layer. Does I guess the decentralized protocol of Nostr help prevent that somehow?
It doesn't prevent it. It creates optionality. So, for example, your identity is just a key, right? You can hold that key yourself, very much like Bitcoin, and you don't have to go through the kind of the humiliation ritual of proving you're a human online with like captchas and shit like that, because you can just take your key and you can unlock any Nostr-enabled app and you just enter. Now, that comes in the same way with Bitcoin, which is if you hold your Bitcoin keys, if you lose them, no one's coming to help you. In the same way with Nostr is if you lose your private key or if someone gets it, then they actually hold your identity because it's a bearer instrument. So there is a danger there, which means you might need to think of ways to secure that key. And it may just be that you might want to secure that key with a third party, someone like Atlantis or whatever, and then you might be able to, like in the future, we will look to build a tool which allows you to abstract your Nostr key and log into other Nostr accounts or other Nostr enabled apps with a single button, right? Because then it'll basically, like the paradigm actually shifts. We're used to log in, but actually in a Nostr paradigm where you own the key, it's actually the paradigm is unlock. It's actually a little bit different.
Okay.
It's a new topography for the web. And that's what kind of, the last thing I'll say on this really quickly is what interests me about this is if you look at web sort of 1.0 and 2.0 that we've had to date, that all of that was built on TCP, IP, HTTP, right? Like these 4 layers of the internet. This next generation of the web has another 2 new layers. It's got money as a protocol, being Bitcoin, and it's got identity as a protocol, which Nostr is currently the leading implementation. As I said, that might change, but currently that seems to be the one. You have a new design space. If you think about the first 4 layers gave us everything from Google to Amazon to Snapchat to Instagram to everything that we use today to Riverside that we're using now, all of it. What will this new design space give us? What kind of applications where you can have the social network intelligence embedded into the product to make it more relevant, more real? Like, will it become the place where more human connection happens and stuff like that? It'll be very interesting how this evolves over the next 5 years, 10 years. I think it has the potential for a renaissance on the web.
Yeah, it seems like it's always technology that changes the world. It changes the way that we organize and communicate and all of these things. And kind of to the evolution story that you already gave us, it's sort of gotten us to the point we're at. But kind of going back to the Bushido code, you started out by saying how 18 months ago the world seemed like we were going in a different direction, and now, not for all of the world. I mean, look at what's going on in some of these other countries. The UK, for example, they seem to still be going down that same path. Most of the world seems to kind of be on this alternate reality. I guess, would you say that, kind of getting back to this Bushido code and trying to instill character and these things into people, do you think these new layers on the internet will allow us to build things that will bring that more to fruition? Or do you think if tech is what kind of got us here, does it work against that?
Let me see how I can answer this question. I was on a pod the other day with Francis Pouliot and a couple other guys, and we were just sort of riffing on a bunch of different things. One of the things I said on that show was I'm convinced the world is going to continue to bifurcate into into the haves and have-nots. That's one way to put it, or into the sheep and the lions, into the remnant and the lemmings, whichever sort of like framing you want to give that.
Creators and the consumers?
Creators and the consumers, the producers and the consumers, whatever, right? So I actually think that's going to get, like, the middle class, I believe, is going to continue to get hollowed out. And I don't think that trend is reversible in the short term. It'll be reversible later, because after a couple of generations, you'll have the distribution of wealth again, and you will start to get a fatter middle class. But I actually think we're going into an era, into an age, where that's going to separate further. My hypothesis is that 6.5 billion people are going to be addicted to social media, scrolling their phones, not touching grass, eating soy, bugs, whatever. Like they're sort of going to move more in that direction. Now, that's obviously a caricature, and I'm sure that caricature will exist, but they will move more in that direction, right? Like mindless slop, and they're just like downloading the slop from online, and that's it. They don't think for themselves anymore. Everything is programmed. They'll take their next shot. They'll do all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, there will be call it 500 million people that are going to increase their sovereignty, increase their location independence, increase their optionality. They'll hold Bitcoin. They'll eat meat. They'll, have babies. They'll, the fertility rate amongst those 500 million people will probably 5 times higher than the fertility rate of these other 6 billion. So you'll sort of get this like increasing bifurcation. And I'm seeing that socially. I'm even predicting that on a location basis. Like you're seeing places that are popping up like that are enclaves. Florianopolis in Brazil is one of these like enclaves. It's becoming the place where all the wealthy in Brazil are coming. And dude, every single weekend I drive around a new corner, there's a new building being built. There's a new family that's come here. There's like, this place is pumping. Same thing in Bali. Look at what Bali was. Bali was just a freaking empty island with some Indonesians and some Dutch people. And, the Aussies, now the Russians came in, and like Bali is pumping, man. It's an amazing place to be. You've got enclaves all throughout Mexico. You've got Ibiza. You've got, the Greek islands. You've got Madeira. You've got all these like sort of spots. And I think what's going to happen is those spots are going to become in high demand, and they're going to attract these sort of higher quality people that want to connect and create these enclaves. So that's sort of my prediction, is that this is going to stretch, and we're going to have this separation, and maybe a couple generations after, this 500 million people that have loads of kids are going to form their descendants are going to form the new middle class, and sort of the 6 billion that lose their fertility rate and are addicted to soy and bugs and all this sort of stuff, that sort of those lineages will kind of die out naturally. And that sounds dark, and I don't mean it in that way, but that's sort of just nature is nature, right? I think that's going to happen, and we're going to have this new sort of formalization of a new middle class, of a new low class, and of a new sort of like aristocratic noble class, and the world is going to sort of reset itself that way over the next 100 years. This is the most formative time in human civilization, I think, for the last, I don't know, at least 500 years, maybe 1,000 years, maybe more.
I mean, you're somebody who studied a lot of history and a lot of cultures and civilizations. And when you look back through the long lens of history, correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears that there was only one short period of time for maybe about 100 years where there was a strong middle class. And that was just through the Industrial Revolution. And so the Industrial Revolution, and particularly through the 1800s and early 1900s, is when we got the factories and the assembly lines. And the factories and the assembly lines brought everybody and made everybody equal, because whether we're smarter or dumber, we just put the cog on the wheel as it goes by on the assembly belt. And it created these massive middle classes. But again, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you look through the long lens of history, you sort of had two classes. And not in like you're born into a caste and you can't move up, but when you think about the types of jobs and the type of income that you had, right? So you had the landowners and the land workers. And today we've gone into the information age, and now potentially with AI calling it the intelligence age. And so, Sam Altman says that we could see the first single person $1 billion company. And so now if I'm willing to work hard, or if the world is creators and consumers, the creators create more than they consume. Consumers consume more than they create, and so you have like a Warren Buffett. Why does he work till he's 93 years old as the president of the company when he's worth billions of dollars? Because he's a creator. And if I have these tools now, I can continue to create. And if what you're saying is 6.5 billion or however many billion people, they're just plugged into the whatever the matrix. It seems that separation between the haves and the have-not just continues to get more out of balance, because there's nothing like that industrial revolution and the assembly lines that builds that strong middle group. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but does history show that is something that we would go back to?
I don't know if we've had the kind of middle class that we had in the last 100 years, because we had such a burgeoning population. Like the population, 7, 8, 9x'd over the last 100 years. So there was like this explosion. I think the feudal system wasn't really the sort of the landowners and just the land workers. There was actually, multiple sort of layers. You had the artisans, you had the nobles, you had the monarchy. So there was a bit more of a strata associated to it. Arguably, I know this one will require a bit of thinking.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't know the correct answer here, but I just think it's going to get way more stretched in the short term between the producers and creators, haves and have-nots, and I think it's really going to move into two buckets before it stratifies again.
Yeah.
And maybe the stratification won't have the same level of middle class as we did during the industrial age, because that was a bit more sort of hands-on. But certainly, I think over time, over a couple more generations, we'll start to see an artisan generation pop up again. This is my sort of my gut instinct. You'll have people who, for example, like imagine you've got some descendants now and you sort of set your entire lineage up for the next 1,000 years. Not all of them are going to be, great capital allocators. Some of them are going to be artists. Some of them are going to be bums.
Sure.
Some of them, you'll sort of have this kind of stratification that'll once again emerge. But I think that'll emerge from the class that is going to be the haves over the next 50 years, right? It'll come from those people. It won't come from the bottom. It won't come from the 6.5 billion.
Yeah.
That's my sort of thinking.
Sort of like a generational theory, fourth turning sort of model.
Something there. Yeah. I should probably think this through further and write an essay or something on it to get my head around it.
Yeah, interesting. What do you think about technology? And since we're on this thread, and I don't know how much thought you've put into it, but an AI taking away all the jobs and being so smart that nobody has any work anymore, and we need universal basic income for everybody to give them money because there's just no jobs available for them to do.
What do I think? Man, I think the only thing that's unlimited is human ingenuity and human desire. I think we always want what we can't have, and no matter what you take away and automate, in our infinite creativity, we'll find something else to do with ourselves. So I bucket AI into the same category as every single prior automation that we had, from the plow through to the tractor, through to everything else. Like what we've done is we've automated things. And look, there's a cost to all automation. You and I spoke about this in Prague, right? Like if you sort of build a factory to automate the creation of a trinket, what'll happen over a couple generations is we'll lose the physical dexterity to build it with our own hands. We'll lose the craftsmanship, but we will have gained the ability to mass produce those things. Is that better or worse? Depending on which way you look at it. Everything sort of has a cost. What that will do, though, is if you create the factories that mass produce these things and all this sort of stuff, it'll actually create the desire for the people to build it with their hands, and it'll create a marketplace for the artisans to come and train themselves up again. So like every time you create a vacuum of something, the human condition drives us towards wanting to recreate the thing that we're missing.
Yeah.
And kind of what I said earlier about social media and social networks, like we've gone and created all this social media, like the trend went that way, and now there's a vacuum for social networks. You would not believe the amount of people I talk to. They're like, man, all I want to do is open up an app and find a place to eat that my friends have recommended. I open up Instagram and I realize 1 hour later that I'm still fucking scrolling.
Yeah.
Why? And it's like, so now I want to sort of fill that vacuum with something else. So I feel like the idea that AI is going to take it all away and we need UBI and all that sort of stuff, I think it's a gross misunderstanding of the human condition.
Yeah.
I think the human condition is much more complex.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100% on that. When we wrote the Communist Manifesto, you had used the word Luddite, and I wasn't even super familiar with what that word was, but this is the same argument as the Luddites, which were afraid that technology would take away all the jobs. And this is now the 6th technological revolution that we've gone through, and every single one, people were afraid of it taking away all the jobs. And I think it's warranted because there is disruption. Jobs are taken, but new jobs are created. And so I think it's a lack of understanding, to your point, like sort of the human condition, but it's also a lack of understanding of how capitalism works. And so each wave creates entirely new sectors that we didn't know about. So you're thinking about things in a vacuum. Well, it gets rid of all these jobs. Yes, but it creates all these new ones that we didn't even think about. So all of a sudden now we have automobiles. And so we have this entire automobile industry that wasn't there before the car. So they did put the buggy makers out of business. But look how big the automobile industry is today, right? Software, the internet. And so it creates industries that we haven't even thought of. But what it also does is it creates consumer demand that wasn't there. So we have lower costs and higher quality. And then we get larger markets, which then creates more jobs because of that. So like when in the 80s, when cell phones were just made, they were like big bricks and I don't know, they were 30 grand or whatever. Hardly anybody had them. But today, look how many people probably on Amazon make money just selling like cases for an iPhone. Totally. That, you know what I mean? And so it's like more cheaper, better, larger markets, more jobs. And so, yeah, in a vacuum, yes, it takes away those jobs, but look how many more get created on every single one. So all of the facts, all of the data points to that. There is no basis for thinking that there is no future of that. And the last thing I'd say is back to that human condition. If you think about it, the only reason why we'd ever give somebody money is if they've provided value, which is typically solved the problem for me. I'm hungry, they solve my hunger, I give them food, etc. And so they're solving problems, right? And I don't imagine any future where humans no longer have problems.
Totally. Yeah, problems are infinite.
Right? And
problems are infinite.
You just solve one problem, you get the next problem, right? So it's like there's just no future for that.
So long as we have women in the world, problems are infinite. So I always tease my wife about this. I'm like, everything is fine, and then like all of a sudden something will like go wrong. She'll be like, I'm freaking out about something. But I think, look, the reality is like, let me give one little example before we move on. Is even let's take this to the extreme, like AI and robotics and all this sort of stuff. Figure out how to do everything, like provide you with food, and you go to a restaurant, everything is automated. There's no one in the kitchen, none of this sort of stuff. I guarantee you, in that kind of a world, the person who goes and opens up a restaurant and says, we have no AI, no robots, and we have paper menus, that restaurant would fucking pump.
Right.
Everyone will be there because they're going to want the handmade food. Like literally every single innovation in one direction creates a vacuum in another. And I think that's the part that people need to sort of internalize when they're trying to understand this, is that human beings are infinitely creative. And in our infinite creativity, we create infinite problems, and then we need to create infinite numbers of solutions to those problems. No amount of AI can ever deal with infinity. It doesn't matter how like good the AI gets. We will always come up with something new to do and some different nuance or variation to do it in. And that means there'll be a need, there'll be a demand, and there'll be a supply to fill that. Simple as that.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of wrap this up, but I want to think about, so obviously you're building Atlantis. I think it's an amazing tool, and I have certainly seen the shift you're talking about from people wanting more of that human connection. I do a lot of little events and even big events, and I've seen a lot of people returning back to those, craving that human desire. And so it's that pendulum that swings back and forth. I guess, from an investor standpoint, we're always kind of thinking about moving to where the puck is going to be. So, like, where is that pendulum going to swing back to? So, if Bitcoin was sort of like a hedge against monetary debasement, do you think Satlantis is sort of like a hedge against lack of trust or trust in social platforms?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one way to frame it. I think it's also a the puck analogy is a good one to use. Is if we make the assumption, or if we can agree that this movement towards uh, more connection, more community, more curation is going to continue to increase, at least, as I said, with a subset of the population. Might not be all 7 billion people on the planet, but at least like 500 million that want to do more stuff in the real world, want to connect with real people, want to go to places, want to curate. They're not interested in ChatGPT giving them a list of top 10 places. Like, they want to know who their friend said. Like, if we agree that that is going to be a trend, then that's the puck that I'm trying to catch. And in my opinion, that's going to continue to accelerate. The desire for social networks once again online is going to continue to increase, and the desire for real, man, what's the word here? Uh, like real recommendation and connection. I'm lacking a word that sort of encompasses both of those, but that piece, in my opinion, is going to be where the value is at. And if we can surface that for people through an application, I think we're onto something big here. And I mean, I don't want to get off onto too much of a tangent here, but once you wrap like sort of Bitcoin in there and you start to create like a marketplace element to it for communities, for creators, for events, like we're about to roll out the Bitcoin ticketing inside the app. So we have some big partnerships announced with not announced, but tied up, that we'll announce over the next 2 months with some big Bitcoin conferences, where we're going to become the satellite event partner for all of these major conferences. So that way, when people come to these conferences, when they, register for side events, they can see who of their friends, who of the people they're connected to and everything are going there. They can pay with Bitcoin. Atlantis is going to have a wallet inbuilt in it as well. So that way, people who are running the events, they can earn Bitcoin in there and kind of like start to establish an entirely parallel social network, economy, product, discovery system, all this sort of stuff. It starts to become very, very interesting, very compelling over the coming years.
If I could see who I know is going to that event, that'd be super helpful. That'd be a great feature. Cool. Well, Aleks, a couple good reads. Get the Bushido of Bitcoin. You can see the book there behind him, and get the Uncommerce Manifesto, of course, the book we wrote together, if you haven't gotten that already. But tell us where people can learn more about Satlantis.
For sure. So obviously people should go and just check out the website, atlantis.io. It is going through a big revamp, so I don't know when this episode is going to go live, but the revamp will move the app a little bit away from the destination-centric focus we have at the moment. It'll become more of a global focus where you can host events, discover events, places, collections, all that kind of thing. You will also notice on there we're doing actually a crowdfund. So if people like the idea, like the concept, reach out to me, or you can go and check out. We're doing an equity crowdfund on Timestamp, which gives people the opportunity to own a piece of Satlantis early on. So we're going to do a big institutional Series A next year, but we're opening it up to the retail market to jump in and own a piece. And then find me on Satlantis, actually, satlantis.io/Svetski. I've got my social profile there. I'm most active there these days, and I'm also still active, obviously, on Twitter. So Svetski writes. And yeah, if you want to check out the book, BushidoBitcoin.com, that's over there as well.
We'll link to all that in the show notes down below. And with that, we'll wrap it up. Thanks, Aleks.
Thanks.
Always great.
Good to see you again, man.